Welcome to Rain Narrator channel where we take you on a journey of deep relaxation and complete tranquility with the sound of raindrops adding an atmosphere of tranquility and comfort. Relax, enjoy, and prepare to enter the world of dreams. If you are looking for an ideal way to relax or calm your mind before sleep, you are in the right place. Follow us to get the best stories. I was never one to believe in love at first sight, especially not online. But then one day I found myself talking to her. Her name was Emily, and her profile picture was just a snapshot of her, sitting on a park bench, a soft smile on her face. It seemed simple enough, but there was something in the way she held herself that intrigued me. I was used to shallow online conversations, the kind where people barely share anything real. But with Emily, it was different from the start. She was easy to talk to, like we'd known each other for years. At first, we only messaged occasionally, exchanging little things about our lives, what music we liked, our favorite movies, even our random thoughts that didn't mean much. But as the days passed, something started to click between us. I found myself looking forward to our conversations, even more than I realized at the time. There was an energy, a warmth in the way she spoke that made everything feel easy. I couldn't help but smile when I saw her name light up on my phone screen. After a couple of weeks, we moved to video calls, and that's when everything changed. Seeing her face, hearing the sound of her voice in real time, it felt real. And I guess for the first time, I let myself really feel something. There were moments when I'd catch myself thinking about her even when we weren't talking, and I could tell it was the same for her. There was something undeniable in the way she laughed at my jokes or the way her eyes would brighten when I shared something personal. She was easy to fall for. I remember the first time she said it. We were talking about how people tend to rush things in relationships, about how love can sometimes be like a whirlwind, and then in a quiet voice she said, "I think I'm starting to feel something for you." I was overwhelmed. Maybe I was more nervous than I should have been, but at that moment I knew it wasn't just some fleeting connection. This was something that had started to grow between us, something real. We talked about meeting in person one day, about the possibility of being more than just two people in a screen. And that thought, that simple dream of holding her hand for real, became something I held on to every day. But as weeks went by, something shifted. I started noticing little things that I didn't before. She would take longer to reply to my messages, and when she did, they seemed a bit distracted. I brushed it off at first. Maybe she was just busy, maybe life was getting in the way. But deep down I could feel a change in the air. And then it happened. I was waiting for her to log in for our usual evening chat. But when she did, she seemed off. It wasn't like her usual self. There was something distant in her voice, something I couldn't place. Finally, she told me, with a tone so gentle that it felt like a knife to the chest, that there was someone else. She tried to soften it, but it didn't matter. She said she had met someone she had been talking to for a while. Someone who was close to her in ways I couldn't be. Someone who had made her feel seen in ways I hadn't. And suddenly, the world felt like it was crumbling beneath me. I wanted to say something, to scream or beg or ask her to stay, but I didn't. She told me it wasn't my fault, that I was everything she'd wanted at first, but things had changed. She'd grown feelings for this other person, and as much as it hurt her to admit it, she couldn't ignore it anymore. I didn't know what to say. I just sat there staring at the screen at her face that seemed so far away now. I won't lie to you, I was angry, I was heartbroken, and I felt betrayed. She had let me into her life, into her world, and now she was telling me that she had found someone else? That's what I kept thinking over and over. How could she do this to me? How could she just walk away? But as the days passed, I realized it wasn't as simple as that. The truth is, people change, feelings change. Sometimes love isn't enough to hold something together, and sometimes, no matter how much you care about someone, they just don't feel the same way anymore. She had loved me, yes, but she had found someone who was closer, someone who was there for her in ways I couldn't be. And as painful as it was, I had to let her go. What hurt the most wasn't just the fact that she'd found someone else. It was the emotional betrayal. The feeling that I had been a part of something that wasn't real, or at least not in the way I thought. Maybe I had been too naive, thinking that because we shared so much online, it meant we shared something deep in the real world. But I realized that love isn't just about what you talk about on a screen. It's about what you feel when you're together, when you're physically present, when you share moments that can't be captured in a message. I couldn't hold on to her. I had to let her go. It was hard, but it was also the only choice I had. I couldn't force her to love me the way I loved her. So here I am, left with the echoes of the conversations we had, the plans we once talked about, and the love that in the end was only mine. I don't regret meeting her, though. I don't regret the love we shared, however brief it was. She was a lesson in a way, a lesson that love can be beautiful, but it can also be fleeting, and sometimes it's just a matter of timing. I wasn't the right one for her, and she wasn't the right one for me in the end either. But I learned that love, no matter how it unfolds, is still worth experiencing, even if it hurts like hell. I had always been the kind of person who kept my feelings to myself. But when I first saw her, I couldn't hold back. She was standing by the window. Her laughter like music that seemed to make the room lighter. Her name was Lily, and every time I saw her, I felt like I was losing myself. It was hard to explain. She wasn't just beautiful in the way you'd expect. There was something about her, something intangible, that made her the center of my world. She had a way of speaking that made even the most ordinary things sound like poetry. Her smile, that smile that could light up the darkest of rooms, was something I thought about long after she was gone. It started like this. We met at the local cafe, the one I always went to whenever I needed a quiet place to think. I'd often see her there, always sitting by the window, reading or writing in her notebook. At first I didn't dare approach her. What if I made a fool of myself? What if she didn't like me? I kept my distance, but I couldn't help watching her from afar. Her beauty wasn't just in her face, but in her kindness too. The way she interacted with the baristas, how she would always thank them with a smile, no matter how busy they were. The world seemed softer when she was around. One day, after weeks of seeing her, I finally got the courage to talk to her. She was sitting at the same spot by the window, sipping her coffee, eyes scanning her notebook. My heart was racing in my chest, my hands slightly trembling as I walked up to her table. "Hi," I said, my voice betraying my nerves. She looked up, her bright blue eyes locking with mine, and she smiled. My heart nearly stopped. "Hey," she replied, her voice so gentle. "How's it going?" I sat down. It was simple, nothing spectacular, but it was the start of something I couldn't yet understand. We talked for hours that day. I found myself telling her things I had never shared with anyone. I had always been the reserved type, not someone who opened up easily, but with Lily, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. She listened intently, laughing at my jokes and asking me questions that made me feel seen. I don't know when it happened, but by the end of the conversation, I knew I was in love with her. Over the next few weeks, we spent more and more time together. I was falling deeper into something I couldn't quite explain, something that felt so right. We went to the movies, took long walks in the park, and had dinners at that same cafe. With every passing day, it felt like I was living in a dream. I thought she felt the same. How could she not? She always laughed at my jokes, always made time to see me. I had every reason to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to feel the same way too. But there was something that always felt off. I noticed it in little things. The way her smile would falter sometimes when we talked, or how she would look at her phone as if waiting for something. I could feel there was something she wasn't telling me, something I couldn't put my finger on. Still, I pushed those thoughts aside. I was in love with her, and that was enough for me. Or so I thought. It all came crashing down one evening. We were at the park, walking under the fading light of the street lamps, when she suddenly stopped. Her expression was unreadable, and for a moment she didn't say anything. "I think we should talk," she finally said. My stomach dropped. The tone of her voice told me everything I needed to know. I could feel the panic rising in my chest, but I tried to keep it together. "Is something wrong?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She hesitated. "There's someone else, James, someone I've been seeing." "I never meant to hurt you, I swear." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. The world around me seemed to blur, the sounds fading away as I struggled to process what she was saying. You're seeing someone else?" I asked, barely able to breathe. I wanted to scream, to ask her how she could do this to me, but the words wouldn't come. "I didn't want to lead you on," she continued, her eyes filled with sadness. "I never wanted to hurt you. But when we started spending time together, I felt guilty. I should have told you earlier. I'm so sorry." I didn't know what to say. All those moments we'd shared, the laughter, the conversations, the feeling of being connected in a way I hadn't with anyone else, suddenly felt hollow. The world felt like it was crashing down around me, and I wasn't sure who I was anymore. How could she do this to me? How could she have made me believe that I was the one when someone else had already claimed her heart? For a moment, all I could do was stand there, feeling the weight of her confession settle in my chest. I wanted to walk away, to scream, to demand answers. But I didn't. I just stood there staring at her. "How long?" I finally asked, my voice breaking. "Almost 6 months," she said, her voice trembling now. 6 months. That was the length of time we'd been spending together. The length of time I had been completely oblivious. I felt like a fool. I didn't know if I could look at her the same way again. "Do you love him?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. Her eyes widened and she bit her lip. "I care about him, but I care about you too, James. You're different. You make me feel things I didn't know I could feel. I didn't know how to choose." Her words hung in the air, but they didn't offer me any comfort. If anything, they made it worse. She wasn't just keeping me in the dark. She had allowed me to fall in love with her, knowing all along that she was already someone else's. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I need time," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I need to think." She nodded, and I turned to leave, my heart heavy, each step feeling like it took me further away from the world I thought I knew. As I walked home that night, I couldn't help but wonder how long she had been lying to me, how long she had kept this secret hidden, and I knew I had to make a choice. But that night under the moonlight, as the cold wind blew against my face, I realized that no matter what I decided, I would never be the same. It was a chilly autumn evening when I first met her. The golden leaves that drifted lazily from the trees were the perfect backdrop for the way. She smiled at me, like something out of a dream. Her name was Emily. We were both freshmen at the same college, and somehow our paths crossed in a coffee shop near campus. I'd noticed her before, walking across the quad with her friends, always laughing, always so full of life. But that evening, when our eyes met for the first time, something clicked. We talked for hours, the conversation flowing like it had always been meant to happen. We were both shy, yet we found comfort in each other's presence. By the time the coffee shop began to empty, we exchanged numbers, both of us nervous and excited. But there was an unspoken connection that felt impossible to ignore. I remember walking back to my dorm that night, my heart racing, wondering if she felt the same way. Things moved quickly after that. We spent days together, walking around the campus, sharing meals at small cafes, talking about everything and nothing. There were moments when I thought we might never have to leave each other's side. Emily was everything I'd ever wanted. She was kind, thoughtful, and she had this way of making the world seem a little bit better just by being in it. We fell in love. I can say that with certainty now, even though the memories of how pure and real that love felt are now stained with betrayal. At the time, everything seemed perfect. I couldn't imagine my life without her, and I never thought there was anything that could break that bond. I was wrong. I had a best friend, Jason. We'd been close since high school. We had each other's backs through thick and thin. He was the kind of friend who would stay up late talking about anything and everything. The guy who would laugh at your jokes even if they weren't funny, and the one who would tell you the truth even when it hurt. I trusted Jason with everything, my secrets, my hopes, and my heart. I had no reason to believe that anything would ever come between us. But then one evening, something happened that changed everything. It started innocently enough. Jason asked if I wanted to grab a beer at a bar near campus. I hadn't seen him much lately. Things had been busy with Emily, and I'd been spending most of my time with her. So I agreed. I hadn't seen him in a while, and it felt good to catch up. We sat at the bar, just the two of us, talking like old times. At first it was the usual, talking about classes, joking about some of the people on campus, making fun of how much everyone tried to impress each other. But there was an unease in the air, something that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Jason's behavior felt off, like he was avoiding eye contact, shifting uncomfortably in his seat, but I brushed it off. Maybe he had just been stressed about something else. That was when I noticed it, Emily's name. He dropped it casually in the conversation. "Yeah, I saw Emily yesterday," he said, looking down at his drink. My heart skipped a beat, but I didn't think anything of it. It wasn't unusual for her to hang out with other people. She had her friends, I had mine. It wasn't like we had to be glued to each other every second, but Jason's tone was different. There was something in the way he said it that made me pause. And then I noticed something else. His eyes darted toward the door, like he was waiting for someone. I could feel the tension between us, a shift I couldn't ignore. The night ended abruptly. I paid for our drinks and we left the bar without much more said. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was overthinking it. But I wasn't overthinking it. The next few days felt like I was walking through a fog. Every time I saw Emily, I felt a gnawing unease in my chest. She seemed fine, more than fine, in fact. She was still the same warm, loving person I'd come to care for so deeply, but something was off with me. I couldn't stop thinking about what Jason had said. I kept replaying his words over and over, trying to figure out what it meant. And then I saw them together. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was walking to class when I noticed Emily and Jason standing near the student center laughing. They didn't see me right away, but I watched them for a moment. I don't know what made me look closer, but as I did, something in me froze. They were standing too close to each other. Emily's hand brushed Jason's arm, and he smiled. One of those smiles I knew all too well. The kind that felt more than friendly. It wasn't a look of casual friendship. No, it was something else. Something that didn't belong. I turned quickly, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to get out of there. I didn't want to believe it, but the doubts that had been festering in the back of my mind suddenly felt too real to ignore. I didn't know what to do. Should I confront them? Should I talk to Emily first? I needed answers, but the fear of what I might discover kept me frozen in place. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of them together kept replaying in my head. I needed to know the truth. So I called Emily. My hands were shaking as I dialed her number. She picked up on the second ring, sounding surprised. "Hey, what's up?" she asked, her voice soft, sweet, like nothing had changed. "Emily," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need to ask you something." She paused, a hesitation I didn't understand at the time. "Of course. What's going on? Are you and Jason together?" There was a long silence on the other end. I could feel my chest tightening, my heart hammering in my ears. And then she said it, words that cut deeper than I could have ever imagined. "Yeah, I didn't want to hurt you, but Jason and I have been seeing each other for a while now." "I'm sorry." I remember hanging up the phone. It was like my world crumbled in an instant. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could hear was the ringing in my ears, the echo of her words repeating in my mind. My heart shattered in ways I didn't think were possible. The girl I loved, the man I called my best friend, they'd both betrayed me. I didn't talk to Jason or Emily after that. There were no more explanations, no more apologies. It wasn't about them anymore, it was about me. And I had to learn how to rebuild. It took time, a lot of time. The pain didn't go away overnight. There were nights I would lie awake wondering how it all went so wrong. But slowly I learned. I learned that love is fragile. It's not something you can take for granted. Not something you can assume will always be there. And sometimes, the people you trust the most will hurt you in ways you never thought possible. But you have to keep going. You have to keep living. I still think about Emily sometimes. I'll always remember the way she made me feel. When we were together, the way she lit up my world. And Jason? Well, I still don't know how to feel about him. Maybe one day I'll forgive him. Maybe I won't. But what matters now is that I learned how to forgive myself, and that's what keeps me moving forward. I had always imagined this day in my mind since I was a boy. A beautiful ceremony, the love of my life in white. A gentle breeze as she walked down the aisle towards me. Everything would be perfect, and we would start a life together, filled with happiness, love, and dreams we would make come true. I thought I knew her better than anyone, and I believed she felt the same way about me. But everything changed in a single moment, on the day I had been waiting for. Her name is Clara. She has this spark in her eyes that lights up even the darkest of days. The way she laughs, carefree and genuine, made me fall in love with her over and over again. She was the kind of person I thought I could never live without, and I was convinced that she felt the same about me. We had been together for 3 years, and each day my love for her grew stronger. We had been planning the wedding for months. Every little detail was falling into place. The venue, the flowers, the cake, everything was perfect. Clara had chosen her dress herself, and when she tried it on for me, I nearly forgot to breathe. She looked like an angel, and the thought of her walking down the aisle toward me filled my heart with such joy, I could hardly contain it. But that morning, on the day of our wedding, something felt off. It was subtle. Just a nagging feeling at the back of my mind, but it didn't go away. Clara was distant, quieter than usual. She was still as beautiful as ever, but there was something in her eyes, something I couldn't quite place. Maybe it was the nerves. Maybe it was the weight of the commitment we were about to make, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was holding something back. I asked her if she was okay, if she was nervous. She smiled and assured me everything was fine, but there was a hesitation in her voice that I couldn't ignore. As the ceremony approached, I tried to calm myself. We had been through so much together. We had shared dreams, hardships, moments of joy and sorrow. I couldn't imagine my life without her. But there it was again, that nagging feeling like a whisper I couldn't ignore. I tried to shake it off. I told myself I was just overthinking things, that it was all going to be perfect. The moment came. Clara stood before me, looking radiant in her dress, her hair cascading around her shoulders. I was standing at the altar, waiting to marry the love of my life. The music played, the guests watched with smiles on their faces, but I couldn't focus. My heart raced. Something was wrong and I couldn't put my finger on it. When the vows began, I spoke from the heart, telling her how much I loved her, how much I had waited for this moment, how I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. I could see her eyes shining, but they were different. There was a hesitation there, a flicker of something. Doubt, maybe? I couldn't be sure. I finished my vows and waited for hers, my hands trembling with anticipation. And then, it happened. Clara looked at me with tears in her eyes. She took a deep breath and started speaking. Her words were soft, almost too soft for me to hear. But the moment she spoke, I felt as if the ground beneath me had cracked open. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I can't marry you." I froze. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood. The room seemed to spin around me as I stared at her, trying to understand what she meant. "Clara, what are you saying?" I stammered, my voice shaking. I've been seeing someone else," she said, her voice breaking. "I never meant for it to happen, but I've fallen in love with him. I can't marry you." My world crumbled in that instant. It felt as if someone had ripped my heart out of my chest and stomped on it. I wanted to scream, to shout, to demand answers, but all I could do was stand there, speechless as Clara's tears flowed freely. The guests were silent. I could hear my breath coming in shallow gasps, but nothing else. How could she do this to me? How could she lie to me for so long, pretending everything was fine, while in reality, she was falling in love with someone else? We had talked about the future. We had shared our dreams, and yet, she had been hiding this from me all along. "Who is he?" I finally managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. She didn't say anything for a moment, as if she couldn't bring herself to speak his name. But then she looked up at me, her face full of regret, and said, "His name is Mark. I'm so sorry. I didn't want to hurt you." I stood there, numb, trying to process everything. Mark. She had been seeing someone else behind my back, all while we were planning our wedding. The trust I had built with her, the love we shared, it all felt like a lie now. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of it, but all I could feel was the crushing weight of betrayal. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. The guests were whispering amongst themselves, but all I could hear was the beating of my heart, pounding in my ears. Clara reached out to me, but I pulled away. I couldn't look at her. Not like this. Not after everything. "I don't know what to say," I finally choked out. "I don't know who you are anymore, Clara." She collapsed into tears, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. She had shattered me, and no amount of tears or apologies could fix what she had done. I turned and walked away, out of the church, out of the life we had built together. The world outside was bright, the sun shining, but it felt as if everything had turned gray. I couldn't understand how someone I had trusted so deeply could betray me like this. I had given her everything, and yet it wasn't enough. As I sat down on the steps outside, the weight of everything hit me. The wedding dress, the flowers, the vows we would have exchanged, they all felt meaningless now. Clara was gone, and in her place was a stranger who had shattered my heart. I don't know what happened to Clara and Mark after that day. I never asked. I just couldn't. I needed to heal, to move on, to rebuild my life from the pieces she had left behind. It took time, a lot of time, but eventually, I learned to forgive her. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. I had to forgive her for my own peace. But I will never forget that moment. the moment I stood at the altar, ready to marry the woman I loved, and she told me she had fallen in love with someone else. That was the moment my world changed forever. It was the kind of summer that made you feel like the world was moving in slow motion, where the heat hung heavy in the air and the sun seemed to be smiling down on every little moment. I met her during one of those sweltering afternoons when I was trying to escape the oppressive heat by sitting under the shade of an old oak tree near the lake. She was sitting there too, reading a book, completely unaware that I was watching her. There was something about the way the sunlight played on her hair, the way she bit her lip when she was deep in thought, that made my heart skip. I didn't know it then, but that day would be the beginning of everything and the end of everything. I still remember the first time we talked. It was her laugh that broke the silence, a soft and melodic sound that somehow made everything seem less heavy. I told her I liked the book she was reading, and that was it. Just a simple compliment that led to hours of conversation, as if we were both starved for connection. She was smart, funny, effortlessly beautiful, and I was completely captivated. We shared a bond, an easy chemistry, as if we had known each other for years, even though we had just met. We spent days by the lake, wandering through the town, talking about everything and nothing. I was falling in love with her, and I didn't even realize it until one afternoon when we were lying on the grass, her head resting on my chest, and I found myself thinking, I never want this to end. But I should have known. Nothing beautiful ever lasts forever. It started with little things, moments that felt insignificant at first, but in hindsight, were the beginning of the end. She'd be distant sometimes, lost in thought, like she wasn't really there with me. I'd try to reach out, but she'd pull away, and every time she did, it felt like I was losing her bit by bit. She'd tell me she had to work late, or she was meeting friends, and I'd accept it, even though a part of me felt something was off. I trusted her completely. I had no reason not to, but even trust can blind you to the truth, can't it? One night, after a long day of work, I went to her apartment to surprise her. I had planned to take her out to dinner, a little celebration of us, our love, our time together. When I knocked on the door, she didn't answer. I waited for a few moments, knocking again, but still nothing. That's when I noticed something strange, the faint sound of voices inside. Not just hers, there was someone else. I stood there, heart racing, the pit in my stomach growing deeper with each passing second. I knocked again, more forcefully this time, and then the door opened. But it wasn't her face I saw. It was the face of a man I didn't recognize. I froze, the words stuck in my throat. I didn't know what to say, didn't know what to feel. The man stood there, looking at me with confusion. Before I could speak, I heard her voice from behind him, and my heart dropped. "Jake, I didn't think you'd be here." Her voice was soft, too soft, like she was trying to make it sound normal, but it didn't. "Who's he?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I felt like the room was spinning. The man stepped aside and she came into view, looking more disoriented than anything else. She avoided my gaze, her eyes drifting down to the floor, and then she said something I'll never forget. "His name is Ethan. He's someone I've been seeing." For a moment, the world went silent. My mind was racing, trying to process her words. "Seeing?" I thought. "What do you mean, seeing?" "Seeing?" I repeated, feeling a bitter laugh bubble up in my throat.
For how long?
She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped forward, her hands clasped in front of her, almost as if she were nervous. But there was no nervousness in her eyes, just guilt. Guilt and something else that I couldn't quite place. "Jake, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. But I've been with him for a while now. It got complicated." "Complicated?" I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers. How could she do this to me? How could she betray me like this? But all I could do was stand there, my chest tightening with the realization that the woman I had loved had lied to me over and over again. "Why?" I finally managed to choke out. "Why didn't you just tell me?" "I didn't know how," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't want to hurt you. I never wanted to hurt you, Jake." But she had. She had already hurt me, and now there was nothing left but the broken pieces of what we had. I didn't know how long I stood there staring at her, my heart torn between anger and disbelief. Eventually, I turned away. I couldn't look at her anymore. I left her apartment that night, my mind reeling with everything I had learned. I don't even remember how I got home. I just remember the emptiness that swallowed me whole. For days, I couldn't shake the image of her and him together. I couldn't stop thinking about the lies, the time I had wasted believing she was the one. She wasn't. Months passed and I tried to move on. I focused on work, on friends, on anything that could distract me from the pain. But I couldn't forget her, not completely. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the feeling of being so completely duped, so completely known by someone, and still tossed aside without a second thought. Then one evening, she showed up at my door. I hadn't seen her since that night. I hadn't heard from her. She looked different, more tired, her eyes heavy with regret. "Jake," she began, her voice breaking. "I know you hate me. I don't blame you. But I need you to know I'm sorry. For everything. I never wanted to hurt you." I stood there looking at her, unsure of what to say. The pain still lingered, but so did the love. The love I had for the woman I thought I knew. The woman who had shattered everything I believed in. "I don't know what to say to you anymore, Chloe," I finally whispered. "I don't think I ever will." And with that, I closed the door. Not because I hated her, but because I had to let go. The love I had for her wasn't enough to undo the betrayal. It was enough to make me realize that sometimes the hardest thing to do isn't to love, but to walk away from the people who break your heart. It's been a while now. I've moved on in my own way. I've learned that love is not always a fairy tale. Sometimes it's just a painful lesson. And sometimes the people you trust the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. But life moves on, and so must I. It all started in a way I never expected. In a place so ordinary that no one would have ever thought it would change everything for me. I was at the park, sitting on a bench near the fountain, my mind tangled with a million thoughts. I wasn't really paying attention to my surroundings. I was just trying to get away from everything, from work, from the pressure, from the weight I carried daily. The park was always a place I came to when I needed to clear my head. But that day, something felt different. I first saw her from the corner of my eye. She was sitting on the grass, her face buried in a book, completely immersed in whatever world she was lost in. I didn't think much of it at first. People came and went all the time, and I didn't expect to feel anything from someone passing through my life. But then something happened. A gust of wind blew through the park, and her book fluttered out of her hands and sailed into the air. She stood up quickly, trying to catch it, but it was already heading towards the fountain, like it was determined to go for a swim. I don't know what compelled me to act. Maybe it was the way her eyes widened in panic, or the way she moved so gracefully, but I found myself standing up and stepping forward before I even realized it. I reached out just in time to catch the book before it landed in the water. It was so impulsive, so instinctive that it caught me off guard. I handed her the book with a smile, and she looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. She had this quiet energy about her, not the kind of loud energy that demands attention, but something subtle and profound. She smiled back, a soft, genuine smile that made my heart skip a beat. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was gentle like the breeze, and it made me feel like I'd been given a gift I didn't deserve. "No problem," I replied, my voice a little too nervous for my liking. We talked for a few minutes, about the book she was reading, about the weather, about nothing in particular. It was the kind of conversation that should have felt awkward but didn't. There was an ease to it that I couldn't explain, and I couldn't stop myself from wanting to know more. As she stood up to leave, she handed me her number just like that, like we were already friends. "I'd like to continue this conversation sometime," she said, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. And that was it. That simple, unexpected moment changed everything for me. I didn't know it then, but my life was about to be turned upside down. Over the next few weeks, we met up at the park again, and then in cafes and even in bookstores. I learned that her name was Clara. She was an artist, a dreamer with a heart that seemed too big for this world. She had a way of seeing beauty in the smallest things, like how the light hit the leaves in the park, or how the clouds changed shapes in the sky. Her world was filled with color, and slowly she brought me into it. I was a guy who'd never paid much attention to those things. But with her, I started to see everything differently. We shared stories, laughs, and dreams. The more time we spent together, the more I realized how much I needed her. She was like a breath of fresh air in a life that had felt suffocating for too long. Her love for life was contagious, and I found myself falling deeper into her orbit, unable to escape but not wanting to. Months passed and we became inseparable. We talked about the future, about things we wanted to do together, about the life we could build. I knew in my heart that I loved her, more than I had ever loved anyone. And she loved me too. I could feel it in every word, every glance. It was the kind of love that felt destined, as if we had been waiting for each other all along. It wasn't long before I asked her to marry me. I didn't have a grand proposal planned, no fancy restaurant or elaborate speech. It was a simple moment in the park where we'd first met. With just the two of us and the sound of the fountain in the background, I took her hand, looked into her eyes, and asked, "Will you marry me?" She said yes, and I felt like the luckiest man in the world. Our wedding was everything I'd dreamed of and more. It was intimate, filled with laughter, and surrounded by the people who mattered most. For a while, life was perfect. We built our life together, and I couldn't imagine a future without her. She was my partner, my best friend, and the love of my life. But as with most things in life, the perfect moments don't last forever. Slowly, things started to change. We got comfortable. We fell into routines, and before we knew it, we were no longer the couple who dreamed together, who saw the world with the same eyes. We were just two people living side by side, but not really with each other. We drifted apart in ways that I didn't even realize at first. The little things that once brought us joy now felt like burdens. Our conversations became less frequent, and the silence between us grew longer. I tried to fix it, to make things work. I suggested trips, new hobbies, even therapy. But the spark we once had was fading, and nothing seemed to bring it back. We tried, oh God, we tried, but sometimes love isn't enough to keep two people together when they've both lost themselves along the way. The day we decided to end it came quietly, like a storm that had been building for months but never announced itself. We sat on the couch facing each other, and it felt like we were strangers. I looked at her and she looked at me, and for the first time in years, I didn't recognize her, and not in the way I used to. "We've changed," she said softly, "and I don't know if we can get back to what we were." I didn't want to admit it, but I knew she was right. We were two different people now. We had grown in ways we hadn't anticipated, and instead of growing together, we had grown apart, and so we ended it. The love we had was real, and it still lingers in my heart, but sometimes love just isn't enough to hold two people together when they've drifted too far apart. Now I look back on it all and I realize that our love story wasn't a failure. It wasn't a mistake. We loved each other deeply, with everything we had, and even though it ended, it will always be a part of me. I'll always remember the way she looked at me when we first met, the way she made me feel like I was the most important person in the world. I'll remember the laughter, the dreams, the promises, and I'll carry those memories with me wherever I go. I never expected her to become such a big part of my life. Honestly, I was content, or so I thought. My days were filled with the usual routine: work, friends, the occasional night out, but there was a certain quietness in my life. Then she came along like a gust of wind, soft and gentle at first, but strong enough to stir something I didn't even know was missing. It all started through Greg, a friend of mine from college. I didn't know he had this close-knit group of friends, and I certainly didn't know one of them would change my life forever. We were sitting at our usual hangout spot, a coffee shop we'd been frequenting for years. Greg had been talking about someone, his good friend, he'd said. "You should meet her," he insisted. "She's amazing." I didn't think much of it. Greg said that about a lot of people, but something about his tone caught my attention that day. That's how I met her, Emma. She was sitting across the table when I walked in, with a smile that could light up a whole room. She had this effortless way of making you feel comfortable, like you'd known her for years, even if you'd just met. At first, I was a little shy, unsure of what to say. Greg was already deep in conversation with her, but I just watched her for a moment. She laughed at something Greg said, and it was one of those laughs that made you want to laugh too, even if you didn't know what was funny. Her eyes sparkled when she spoke, like she was carrying little secrets in them, stories she wanted to share. "Hi, I'm Emma," she said, extending her hand toward me. Her voice was warm, inviting. I took her hand, my mind racing. "Nice to meet you," I said, trying to sound casual, but I felt a little nervous. We talked for hours that afternoon, and I learned so much about her. She was passionate, witty, and surprisingly down to earth for someone with such an infectious personality. I found myself wanting to know everything about her, from her childhood to her favorite books, even the smallest things that seemed insignificant. And yet each detail felt important. From that day, we started seeing more of each other. It wasn't anything grand at first, just casual meetings here and there. Sometimes with Greg, other times just the two of us. We'd talk about everything and nothing at all. The kind of conversation that never felt forced. We'd laugh, share ideas, and slowly, it became clear to me that I was looking forward to seeing her. More than I realized at first. I noticed the little things. How she would play with her hair when she was thinking. How she bit her lip when she was nervous. How she always made a joke out of the smallest inconveniences in life. But I didn't realize how deeply I was falling for her. I never let myself believe in love at first sight. I thought that was just something in movies. But with Emma, it was different. The more I saw her, the more I found myself hoping that our time together wouldn't end. Wishing the days didn't feel so short. It wasn't until one evening, a month or so later, when we found ourselves sitting outside on a park bench, just the two of us, that I realized what was happening. It had been a long day and the sun was setting, casting a soft golden glow over the park. We were quiet for a moment, just listening to the rustle of the leaves in the breeze. "I think I'm falling for you," I blurted out before I could stop myself. The words hung in the air heavier than I intended. She turned to look at me, her eyes searching mine. I felt exposed, vulnerable, but somehow I couldn't take the words back. And then, to my surprise, she smiled softly. "I was wondering when you'd say that," she said, her voice gentle. "I think I'm falling for you too." It felt like the whole world shifted in that moment, like I'd found something I didn't even know I was looking for. That evening, as we walked back to the car, I felt lighter than I had in ages. A weight had been lifted off my shoulders, and suddenly life seemed so full of possibilities. From there, things just clicked. Every time we were together, it felt like a little more of the puzzle of us was falling into place. We learned each other's rhythms, the way she liked her coffee, how she needed space sometimes to think, how she would smile a certain way when she was happy, but didn't know how to express it. Over time, the relationship deepened. We went on small adventures, weekend trips to places neither of us had been, cooking dinner together in my tiny apartment, sharing our dreams, our fears, our mistakes. Each day I realized how much I wanted to be with her, how much she had become a part of my world. Then came the moment when I knew for sure that she was the one. It was a quiet evening, just the two of us on the couch after a long week, watching a movie. She was resting her head on my shoulder, her hand intertwined with mine. I could feel her heartbeat, steady and calm, and in that moment, I knew that no matter what happened, I wanted this, her, us, forever. I didn't need a grand gesture or a dramatic confession. It was just this peaceful, content feeling of being together, knowing she was the one I could build a future with. So one evening, not too long after that, I asked her. We were standing on the balcony of my apartment, the city lights twinkling below. The sky was a rich, deep blue, and everything felt just right. I took a deep breath, turned to her and asked, "Will you marry me, Emma?" She looked at me with wide eyes, her lips parting in surprise. And then slowly a smile spread across her face, a smile that made my heart skip a beat. "Yes," she whispered. And in that moment, the world seemed to stand still. I had never felt more sure of anything in my life. Our wedding was a simple affair, just like our love, beautiful, sincere, and surrounded by close friends and family. I couldn't believe how lucky I was, how everything had fallen into place. And as we said our vows, standing there before everyone who meant the most to us, I realized how much more life there was ahead of us. It's funny, looking back, I never could have predicted where Emma and I would end up. It all started with a simple introduction from Greg, and now here we are, partners for life. I never thought I'd be someone who believes in fate or destiny, but with Emma, it feels like the universe just knew what it was doing, and I'm forever grateful for that. It all started when I was assigned to a new project at work. I never thought a simple task would change everything for me, but it did. I had been working at this company for a while, so I thought I knew all the people I needed to know. That was until I met her. Her name was Lily, and I didn't know much about her when we first crossed paths. She wasn't exactly new to the company, but her role was different from mine, so we didn't interact much. That was until this project came up. We were both chosen to be part of a small team tasked with an important initiative that would directly affect the company's future. From the moment she walked into the first meeting, I couldn't help but notice her. There was something about the way she carried herself. Confident but not overbearing, thoughtful but not too serious. She had this quiet energy, an aura that made everything seem more interesting when she was around. It wasn't just her looks, though, I have to admit. She was stunning, but it was the way she spoke, the way she thought. It was the way her eyes sparkled when she discussed ideas. At first, I kept my distance, not wanting to seem like I was overly interested or too eager. I tried to focus on the work, but I found myself watching her more than I intended to. She had this way of making even the toughest tasks seem manageable. Her contributions to the project were always on point, and she had this rare ability to explain complicated concepts in simple terms. It was like she made the difficult things look easy, which, to be honest, kind of frustrated me because I was struggling to keep up with her. We started working closely together, side by side on various aspects of the project. She would ask me questions about things I'd been working on for years, and somehow she always knew how to make me feel like my input was valuable. At the same time, I noticed how quickly she picked up on everything I shared with her. There was no doubt in my mind that she was incredibly smart, but more than that, she had this remarkable ability to listen, to really understand what others were saying. As the weeks went by, I found myself looking forward to our meetings. I began to admire her more and more, not just for her intelligence or her work ethic, but for the way she made the workplace feel more alive. She had this infectious optimism, a lightness about her that could turn even the most stressful days into something bearable. It was a relief to know I wasn't the only one putting in extra hours, staying late to make sure everything was right. But somehow it never felt like work when she was there. I guess it was inevitable. One day, after a long meeting that stretched well into the evening, we found ourselves alone in the office, wrapping up a last-minute task. It wasn't the first time we'd been the only two left working, but there was something different about that night. Maybe it was the way the dim lights cast shadows across the room, or the fact that we'd been working nonstop for hours. Whatever it was, I couldn't help but feel like there was a shift between us. It wasn't just about work anymore. "Do you ever get tired of this?" she asked out of the blue, her voice breaking the silence. I looked up, surprised by the question. "What do you mean? The long hours, the stress? I mean, it's worth it, right? But sometimes I wonder if it's all worth it." I sat back in my chair thinking about it for a second. "Yeah, I get what you mean. But I think it's moments like these, working with a team that gets it, that makes it worth it. You know?" She smiled, and there was something so genuine about it. "I guess you're right." And then, for the first time, I found myself speaking before I could stop myself. "I'm glad it's you working on this with me." Her smile widened, and I swear I felt my heart race just a little. It was one of those rare moments where everything just clicked, but I wasn't sure if I was reading too much into it. As time went on, we spent more and more time together, both in and out of work. We started to grab lunch, just the two of us. It wasn't anything special, just quick bites at the local cafe, but those moments meant everything to me. We would talk about our favorite books, movies, and random things that had nothing to do with work. It felt like we were creating our own little world, and the more I got to know her, the more I found myself falling for her. I didn't tell her at first. I wasn't sure if she felt the same. And honestly, I didn't want to complicate things at work. But every time she laughed, every time her eyes lit up when she shared something she was passionate about, I couldn't help but feel a sense of longing. I was falling for her, and I didn't know how to stop it. There was a moment, one of those moments where everything suddenly made sense. When we were sitting together, working late again, the office was nearly empty, and she was going over some notes, her brow furrowed in concentration. I was watching her, completely mesmerized, when she looked up and caught me staring. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she asked, "Is something wrong?" Her voice was gentle, but there was a slight hint of curiosity in her eyes. I couldn't keep it in anymore. "No," I said softly. "Nothing's wrong. I think I'm falling for you, Lily." She blinked, surprised by my honesty. "Really?" she whispered, as if she wasn't sure whether to believe me. I nodded, my heart pounding. "Yeah, I've been trying to hide it, but I don't want to anymore. I like you, Lily, a lot." There was a long pause, and for a moment, I thought maybe I had ruined everything. But then she smiled, that same genuine smile that always made my heart flutter. "I think I'm falling for you too," she said quietly. That was the moment everything changed. Our friendship, our working relationship, everything shifted. But it wasn't awkward. It was the start of something real, something special. From then on, we not only worked side by side on the project, but began building something outside of work too. We'd steal moments away from the office, go for walks, talk about our future dreams. It was as though we were writing our own story, one step at a time. And as the project finally came to a successful close, I realized that what had started as admiration had turned into something far deeper. It wasn't just about our work anymore, it was about us, together, navigating life's challenges hand in hand. What began as a shared project had blossomed into a love story that I never saw coming but would never change. Looking back, I can honestly say that the best part of that project wasn't the success or the accolades. It was the fact that I found her, Lily, and she found me. And together, we discovered something far more important than any task or deadline: each other. I'll admit it, when I first met her, I hated her. It wasn't one of those classic love at first sight stories. No, it was the opposite. The first time I saw her, she was sitting at the desk right next to mine in that hellish history class. Her name was Clara, and she had this aura of absolute indifference, like nothing in the world could touch her. That drove me crazy. I couldn't stand how effortlessly she sat there, flipping through pages of the textbook, while I struggled to even stay awake. She was a know-it-all. She answered every question the professor asked without hesitation, always with that self-satisfied little smile on her face. Honestly, I couldn't stand her. I didn't even know why, but it just irritated me. It wasn't jealousy. Okay, maybe it was a little jealousy. I mean, she seemed to have her whole life together, while I couldn't even keep my schedule straight. But no matter the reason, I made it a point to avoid her. If there was ever a group project, I always hoped I wouldn't be paired with her. I don't even know why I disliked her so much. Maybe it was her perfection. Maybe it was the way she carried herself with this quiet confidence. Or maybe it was because I knew deep down that she was smarter than me. Whatever it was, we didn't get along. I would snap at her when we were forced to work together, and she'd respond with this sarcastic tone, never backing down. Things only got worse when we were forced to work on a project together for the final exam. I'll admit I was dreading it. I thought it would be the longest few weeks of my life. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was how everything would change. The project was supposed to be a comprehensive presentation on the history of some ancient civilization. We were both expected to contribute equally. Clara took the lead, naturally. She immediately assigned the tasks, and I was more than happy to do whatever she told me. Partly because I didn't want to make her mad, and partly because I didn't think I could do any better. We both dug into the research. But what surprised me was how easy it felt when we worked together. She had a way of breaking down the most complicated topics into something understandable, and I started realizing that I didn't hate her, I admired her. Of course, that didn't mean I started liking her right away. It wasn't that simple. But over time, I noticed something I hadn't before. She was a lot more than just a bookworm. Clara was passionate about history. She talked about it with such fire, as if the past was alive inside her. And when we were debating over something, I found myself actually enjoying our arguments. She had this way of challenging me, making me think harder than I ever had before. And with each passing day, I couldn't deny it. I was starting to like her. Not just because of her intelligence, but because she made me a better version of myself. It happened slowly, like a quiet storm, until one day I found myself laughing with her after one of our debates. We'd finished the research, and she'd suggested we take a break. We sat at a nearby cafe, the soft hum of conversation around us, and she surprised me by asking about my life. Not the usual how's school stuff. No, she asked about my dreams, about what I wanted to do when this was all over. I was taken aback. Clara, the perfect student, cared about what I thought. As we talked more, I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't with anyone else. And that's when I realized she wasn't just an enemy anymore. She was becoming a friend. Maybe more than that. Over the next few weeks, we spent a lot of time together. Studying, debating, just hanging out. We started to get each other, and with each passing day, I felt this bond growing between us, like we were two puzzle pieces that fit together perfectly. It didn't matter how different we were on the surface. We completed each other. There were moments when I couldn't help but smile when she wasn't looking. Moments when I'd catch her looking at me the same way, like she was seeing something new in me too. One night after a late study session, we were walking home together, the streetlights casting a soft glow on the sidewalk. She looked at me, her face illuminated by the light. and said something that made my heart stop for a second. "I didn't expect this," she said, almost whispering. "I didn't think I'd find someone who, I don't know, makes me think differently about everything." And I realized then that she felt it too. What we were building was real. But even then, even with everything that had changed, I didn't fully understand what was happening between us. It wasn't until we had a huge fight, a stupid argument about something small, that I finally figured it out. The fight wasn't even about the project anymore. It was about something much deeper. I was angry at her and she was angry at me. But at the end of it all, we both realized we cared too much to let something so trivial tear us apart. When we made up, when we stopped yelling at each other and actually listened, I knew she was the person I needed in my life. We were opposites, sure. She was the careful planner, and I was the impulsive one, but together we balanced each other. Her strength was my anchor and my spontaneity was her spark. By the time we finished the project and got our grades, I wasn't just proud of the work I was proud of what we'd built between us. It wasn't perfect. Relationships never are. But what we had felt like it could last. And I knew I wanted to try. We kept spending time together after that. And somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking of her as just Clara, the girl I couldn't stand, and started seeing her as Clara, the girl who made me feel complete. Maybe love doesn't always look like the stories you hear. It isn't always fireworks and grand gestures. Sometimes it's built slowly, from the ground up, over arguments, laughter, shared dreams, and moments when you realize that the person you once thought was your enemy is actually the person who makes you feel more like yourself than anyone else ever could. Sure, I'll tell you this story from his perspective, and it will unfold as he reflects on everything that happened. Here goes. It started like any other summer, warm, easy, full of promise. I was a young man, restless, unsure of what I wanted in life, but certain of a few things. I was searching for meaning, for something that would make the monotony of the world around me disappear. That's when I met her. Her name was Emma. She had this light about her that drew people in. Her laughter was soft, but it carried with it a kind of warmth that made you feel safe. I was drawn to her immediately, like moth to flame. I noticed her the first day. She walked into the coffee shop where I worked part-time. She sat by the window, a book in her hand, staring out at the world like she was looking for something, or maybe she was just thinking, lost in her thoughts. We didn't speak that first day, but I kept seeing her day after day, the same quiet figure in the corner. Eventually, I found the courage to approach her. I don't remember the words exactly, but I remember how she smiled when I spoke, like I'd just given her a gift she wasn't expecting. She had these eyes, big and full of life, and I felt like she was looking right through me, understanding me in a way no one else did. The first time we went out, we walked along the lake, talked for hours about everything and nothing. She told me she loved the sound of the water, how it made her feel calm. She shared stories about her childhood, about her dreams of becoming a writer, how she believed the world could be better if people just listened more. I listened, absorbed it all. Every little detail about her seemed important. She made me feel like I was more than just a guy with no real plans. With her, everything seemed possible. Over time, we became inseparable. Our connection was deep, the kind of bond you can't put into words. We spent nights together, talking until we fell asleep on the couch, waking up to the quiet hum of the morning light creeping in. She made me feel alive in ways I never thought possible. But as perfect as it all seemed, I should have known that nothing that good could last forever. Things started to shift subtly at first. She became more distant, and I began to notice that when I looked into her eyes, the spark that had once been there was fading, but I couldn't quite figure out what was happening. Was I just imagining it, or was she changing in ways I didn't understand? One evening I asked her about it. "Emma, what's going on?" I remember the way her face tightened, like I'd said something I wasn't supposed to. She told me everything was fine, that she was just stressed about her writing and life in general. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to hold on to the love we had. So I did. I ignored the feeling that something wasn't right. Then came the day that shattered everything. It was a Saturday. We had plans, but she texted me earlier in the day, saying she needed to clear her head. I was frustrated, but I told her I'd give her space. She asked if we could talk later. I said sure, not realizing that the conversation we were going to have would be the end of everything I thought we were. That night she came over. I could tell something was off, but I still didn't expect what was coming. She sat on the couch, her hands shaking a little, and looked at me like she was about to confess something terrible. "I've been seeing someone else," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's been going on for a while, and I didn't know how to tell you." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I thought I heard her wrong. "What? You—" She cut me off, her eyes welling with tears. "I never meant for it to happen, but I don't love you the way you think I do. I care about you, but it's just not the same anymore. I met him, and he makes me feel like I'm being seen in a way I haven't felt in a long time. I didn't want to hurt you, but I can't keep pretending." In that moment, time stopped. My heart stopped. The world felt so cold, and I was left with nothing but her words echoing in my head. I wanted to scream, to cry, to do something, but all I could do was sit there numb, as she continued to explain herself, apologizing over and over again. I remember her talking about how it just happened, how the other guy made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. It was clear to me then, the connection we had, the love I thought we shared, meant nothing to her now. She was already gone in her heart. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have ever imagined. I don't know how long we sat there in silence after she finished. I think I wanted her to leave, but part of me didn't want her to go. I kept asking myself how I missed all the signs, how I didn't see the cracks forming in what I thought was a perfect love. But she left anyway. She took her things, a few books, some clothes, and that was it. No more good mornings, no more late night talks. She walked out of my life with someone else, and I had to accept that. In the days that followed, I found myself replaying every moment we spent together. I thought about all the times I'd told her I loved her, how her smile used to light up my world. But now it all felt like a lie. The worst part wasn't that she betrayed me. It was that I had given her everything. And for what? So she could walk away when it was convenient for her? I spent months trying to understand why. Why me? Why her? What went wrong? There were no answers, just a hollow space where our love used to be. I tried moving on, tried to find someone else. But how do you heal when the person you trusted most in the world tore everything apart? Emma broke my heart in a way I never thought was possible. But even through the pain, I learned something important. Sometimes people change. Sometimes love fades. And sometimes the person you give everything to will walk away, leaving you with nothing but memories of what could have been. I don't hate her. I'm not even sure I want to. I just wish I'd known sooner. But then again, maybe I needed to believe in that love to understand what it means to lose it. In the end, all I can do is move on. Life goes on even when it feels like it shouldn't. And one day I'll look back at Emma and smile, not because it didn't hurt, but because I lived through it. And